In the cold vacuum of space, where empires rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that every advanced civilization learns: conquest is inevitable. The strong devour the weak, the technologically superior absorb the primitive, and resistance is nothing more than a brief, amusing delay before submission. For 3 millennia, the hegemony had proven this truth across 1,000 worlds. Their crystal ships had darkened alien skies, their neural dampeners had silenced rebellious thoughts, and their compliance protocols had turned entire species into willing servants. They were the apex predators of the galaxy, and their appetite was insatiable. When their long-range scouts detected the third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the outer rim of the Milky Way, they expected nothing more than another routine subjugation. The inhabitants called their world Earth, and preliminary scans revealed a species that had barely scratched the surface of faster-than-light travel. Primitive. Divided. Perfect for harvesting. But the hegemony had made one critical error in their calculations. They had studied human technology, human biology, human society, but they had never bothered to understand the human spirit. They saw a species that fought among themselves and assumed weakness. They witnessed human conflicts and mistook them for chaos rather than what they truly were: practice. Humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war, not against alien invaders, but against the most dangerous enemy they would ever face: themselves. Every dictator toppled, every revolution won, every tyrant defeated had forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before: a species that simply refused to kneel. The hegemony was about to learn that there's a vast difference between a civilization that conquers others and one that has spent millennia conquering itself. They thought Earth would submit. They were catastrophically wrong. Admiral Zexhai stood on the command deck of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. The blue marble hung suspended against the star field like a jewel waiting to be plucked. His forearms moved gracefully across the holographic displays, reviewing the final preparations for what should be the simplest conquest in hegemony history. "Status report," he commanded, his translator converting his chittering vocalizations into the standard hegemony dialect. "All fleets in position, Admiral," responded his tactical officer, an insectoid creature whose species had submitted to the hegemony without firing a single shot. 300 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels, and 50,000 compliance troops ready for deployment. Zexhai nodded with satisfaction. The force was massive overkill for a single planet, but the hegemony had learned long ago that overwhelming displays of power shortened conflicts and reduced casualties on both sides. Terror was a more efficient weapon than plasma cannons. "What's the status of their defensive capabilities?" Zexhai asked. His intelligence officer, a tall being with crystalline skin, consulted her displays. "Minimal, Admiral. They possess nuclear weapons, but their delivery systems are primitive. Their space presence consists of a few orbital platforms and research stations. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no faster-than-light combat vessels. Our preliminary scans suggest their most advanced military technology is roughly equivalent to hegemony surplus from 8 centuries ago." "Pathetic," Zexhai muttered. "And their unity?" "Non-existent, sir. The planet is divided into nearly 200 separate political entities, many of which are actively hostile to each other. They've been engaged in continuous warfare for their entire recorded history. Our psychological profiles suggest they'll likely surrender their own governments to us if it means gaining advantage over their neighbors." Zexhai's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "Typical. Fear makes cowards of them all. Begin transmission of the compliance demand." The communication systems powered up, sending a signal that would reach every receiver on Earth simultaneously. The message was simple, translated into every human language, and designed to break morale instantly. On Earth, every television screen flickered to life. Every radio crackled. Every internet connection carried the same message. Across the planet, billions of humans stopped what they were doing as Admiral Zexhai's image appeared before them. "Inhabitants of the planet designated Sol 3, his synthesized voice announced, "You are now subjects of the galactic hegemony. Your species has been evaluated and found suitable for integration into our empire. You have 24 of your local time units to surrender unconditionally. Choose representatives to negotiate the terms of your submission, and prepare to transfer control of your governments, military forces, and resources to Hegemony Administration. The image shifted to show the massive fleet hanging in space above Earth like a metallic storm cloud blotting out the stars. Resistance is futile and will result in unnecessary suffering. The Hegemony has conquered over 1,000 worlds. Your primitive technology cannot threaten our forces. Your divided nature makes coordinated defense impossible. Submit now, and your transition to hegemony citizenship will be peaceful. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why our empire has endured for 3 millennia. The transmission ended, leaving Earth in stunned silence. In the White House, President Saracen stared at the blank screen where the alien admiral had been moments before. Around her, the Situation Room buzzed with urgent conversations as military advisors and cabinet members tried to process what they had just witnessed. "How many ships?" she asked quietly. General Rodriguez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, cleared his throat. "Satellite imagery confirms at least 300 large vessels, ma'am. Thousands of smaller ones. They're holding position at the edge of our atmosphere. Can we fight them?" The silence stretched uncomfortably before the Secretary of Defense spoke. "Madam President, they're right about our technological disadvantage. Our best missiles might scratch their paint. Nuclear weapons assume we can get close enough to deliver them, which seems unlikely given their demonstrated capabilities." President Chen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a steely resolve that had carried her through 2 terms and countless crises. "Get me the other world leaders. Emergency session. And someone find me every physicist, engineer, and military strategist we have. If these aliens think we're going to roll over because they have better technology, they've seriously misjudged what it means to be human." Across the globe, similar scenes played out in capitals and command centers. In Moscow, President Volkov was already mobilizing every submarine and strategic missile system Russia possessed. In Beijing, Premier Liu was coordinating with her military commanders to determine if any of their experimental weapons might prove effective. In London, Prime Minister Williams was placing urgent calls to allies across Europe and the Commonwealth. But the most significant conversation was happening in a small coffee shop in Geneva, where Dr. Elena Rodriguez was having lunch with her colleague Dr. Yuki Tanaka when the transmission interrupted their meal. "Did you see the power signature on those ships?" Elena whispered, her mind racing with calculations. Yuki nodded grimly. "Fusion-based, but not like anything we've developed. The energy readings suggest they're using some form of controlled matter-antimatter reaction. Which means they have antimatter containment technology," Elena continued. "But look at their ship design, those hulls are metallic composites, not energy-dispersed materials. They're physically solid. You're thinking what I'm thinking." Elena smiled for the first time since the transmission began. "They may have better technology, but they're still playing by the same physical laws we are. Matter and energy. Action and reaction. And if they're vulnerable to physical damage." Within hours of the alien demand, something unprecedented in human history began to occur. Ancient enemies started sharing intelligence. Classified technologies were declassified and distributed globally. Scientists who had spent their careers working on competing projects suddenly found themselves collaborating across national boundaries. In underground facilities across Earth, weapons that had been theoretical began moving into production. The humans had something the hegemony had never encountered before, a species that had spent centuries preparing to fight a technologically superior enemy by developing weapons specifically designed to level the playing field. Admiral Zexai monitored the communications traffic from Earth with growing puzzlement. He had expected panic, submission, or at least attempts at negotiation. Instead, the planet had gone into what could only be described as coordinated preparation for war. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from multiple points on the planet's surface. Industrial facilities are operating at maximum capacity. Military units are mobilizing globally." "Let them," Zexai replied dismissively. Their primitive weapons cannot harm our vessels. When they realize the futility of resistance, they'll surrender quickly enough. But his confidence wavered slightly when the intelligence officer approached with a worried expression. "Admiral, our cultural analysts are requesting permission to extend the deadline. They're concerned that we may have misunderstood human psychology." "Explain." "Sir, our standard psychological profiles are based on species that developed naturally under evolutionary pressure from predators and environmental threats. Humans are different. They're the apex predator on their world, and they've never faced a superior enemy except themselves. Our analysts believe this may have created psychological patterns we haven't encountered before." Zexhi's mandibles twitched with irritation. "Elaborate." "They don't appear to understand that they should be afraid, sir. Every other species we've conquered recognized our superiority immediately and submitted to preserve their lives. Humans seem to be calculating how to fight us." The Admiral stared at Earth spinning slowly beneath his fleet. "Impossible. They've seen our numbers. They know their technology is inferior." "Yes, sir. But, according to our historical analysis, humans have a consistent pattern of refusing to surrender even when facing impossible odds. They have a saying, 'Death before dishonor.'" "Then, they'll have death," Zexhi replied coldly. "Signal the fleet. When their deadline expires, we begin orbital bombardment of military targets. A few demonstrations of our power will cure them of their foolish bravery." He turned back to the viewport, watching Earth complete its rotation. In 18 hours, one way or another, this would be over. The hegemony had never failed to break a species' will to resist. But, as night fell across Earth's surface, strange lights began to appear. Not the familiar glow of cities, but new illuminations, the cold blue radiance of fusion reactors powering up, the orange flicker of industrial forges working overtime, and, deep beneath the surface, the almost invisible signature of technologies that had never been tested outside laboratory conditions. The humans were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to remind the galaxy why their species had spent 10,000 years fighting themselves, because they were the only enemy dangerous enough to provide worthy practice for what was coming. The hegemony was about to discover that there's a crucial difference between conquering a civilization and awakening one. 23 hours and 17 minutes after the hegemony's ultimatum, Admiral Zexhi received his first indication that Earth would not be surrendering quietly. "Sir, we're detecting launch signatures from multiple points on the planet's surface," his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking nervously. "Primitive chemical rockets, but there are hundreds of them." Zexhi barely looked up from his command display. "Intercept them. Use our point defense systems. Show them how futile their resistance truly is." The hegemony's defensive networks activated, streams of plasma lancing out to intercept the ascending rockets. Explosions blossomed across Earth's atmosphere as the primitive missiles were destroyed with contemptuous ease. Within minutes, every single human projectile had been eliminated. "Pathetic," Zexhi muttered. "Signal the fleet. Begin precision strikes on military installations. Perhaps watching their weapons disappear will convince them to." His words were cut off as alarms began shrieking across the command deck. Warning lights bathed the bridge in pulsing red as every sensor array on the ship screened warnings simultaneously. "Admiral!" The sensor operator's voice cracked with disbelief. "Multiple high-energy contacts rising from the planet's surface. Velocity, this can't be right." "Sir, they're moving at significant fractions of light speed." Zexhi spun to face the main display, his four eyes widening as he saw what appeared to be streams of coherent light ascending from Earth like deadly auroras. But these weren't light beams, they were physical projectiles moving so fast they appeared as continuous beams to the sensors. "Evasive maneuvers," he shouted, but it was already too late. The first kinetic penetrator struck the heavy cruiser dominance of stars amidships. The projectile, no larger than a telephone pole and moving at 12% of light speed, punched through the vessel's shields as if they didn't exist. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, but concentrated into a point the size of a marble. The cruiser simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a flash of superheated plasma that temporarily created a new star in Earth's orbital space. Impossible! Zexhai screamed as more ships across his fleet began disappearing in brilliant flashes. They don't have that technology. Our intelligence reports, sir, incoming transmission from the planet, his communications officer interrupted. Put it through, Zexhai snarled. The screen flickered to reveal President Chen, but she was no longer in the White House Situation Room. Behind her, Zexhai could see what appeared to be a military command center filled with humans working frantically at computers and displays. Admiral Zexhai, she said with a calm that chilled him to his bones, this is President Chen of the United Nations Defense Coalition. We've received your surrender demand. Surrender demand? Zexhai's translator struggled with his outraged chittering. We are the ones demanding surrender. You are primitives. You cannot threaten us. Chen smiled, and Zexhai realized he was looking at the expression of predator war when it had cornered its prey. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You see, you assumed we were primitive because we haven't spread across the galaxy. But that wasn't because we couldn't, it was because we were busy. Another wave of kinetic penetrators rose from Earth's surface. More hegemony ships vanished in nuclear fire. For the past century, Chen continued conversationally, humanity has been developing weapons specifically designed to fight an enemy with superior technology. We call them force equalizers. Those kinetic penetrators, for example, they're launched using magnetic acceleration systems that we've been perfecting for decades. Simple physics, really. Accelerate a dense projectile to relativistic speeds, and it doesn't matter how advanced your shields are. Zexhai watched his tactical display with growing horror as his fleet, the pride of the hegemony, continued to be systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have been able to scratch their paint. But that's just the beginning, Chen said. You see, Admiral, humans have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. We've been preparing for war against a superior enemy for longer than your empire has existed. Would you like a demonstration of what a truly primitive species can accomplish when properly motivated? Without waiting for an answer, she nodded to someone off-screen. Across Earth's surface, concealed installations began to power up. The first indication Zexhai had that something new was happening came when his ship's artificial gravity fluctuated. Then, the lights dimmed. Then, every piece of electronic equipment on the command deck began experiencing interference. What's happening? He demanded. His science officer's crystalline skin had gone from clear to an alarm shade of amber. Sir, we're detecting massive gravitational anomalies emanating from the planet's surface. They appear to be artificially generated. That's impossible. Gravitational manipulation requires technology we've only theorized about. The science officer's color shifted to deep orange, his species' equivalent of terror. Sir, the gravitational fields are increasing. They're targeting our fleet specifically. On Earth, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the control room of the Gravitational Research Institute, her hands moving across controls that represented 30 years of theoretical physics made manifest. Around her, scientists from every major power on Earth worked in unprecedented cooperation, their national loyalties forgotten in the face of humanity's first extraterrestrial war. Gravitational lens focusing to maximum efficiency, she reported to President Chen via the Global Command Network. Target lock achieved on the alien flagship. Are you certain this will work? Chen asked. Elena smiled grimly. Admiral, we've been studying black holes for decades. Creating artificial gravitational fields was the natural next step. These aliens may have better energy weapons, but I doubt they've ever faced weaponized spacetime itself. She pressed the activation key. Admiral Zexhai felt his ship begin to stretch. The sensation started subtly, objects appearing slightly elongated, colors shifting toward the red end of the spectrum. Then, the effects intensified dramatically. Admiral, his pilot screamed. The ship is being pulled apart. Gravitational forces are exceeding hull stress limits. Zexhai stared at the tactical display as his mighty dreadnought, the most powerful vessel in the hegemony fleet, began to literally stretch under forces that treated advanced metallurgy like tissue paper. Around his ship, other vessels in the fleet were suffering similar fates, their hulls twisted into impossible shapes before finally succumbing to tidal forces that no shield could deflect. "Retreat," he commanded. "All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace. Immediate withdrawal." But, as his navigation officer attempted to engage the faster-than-light drive, nothing happened. "Sir, hyperspace engines are non-responsive. We're detecting massive spatial distortions around the entire planet. They're preventing us from opening hyperspace windows." President Chen's voice filled the command deck again. "Having trouble leaving, Admiral?" "That would be our space-time interdiction field. Another little project we've been working on. You see, we realized that any sufficiently advanced enemy would probably try to run away when they discovered we weren't as helpless as we appeared. We couldn't have that." Zexai's fleet, reduced to less than half its original strength in a matter of minutes, found itself trapped in Earth's gravity well by forces beyond their comprehension. "This is impossible," Zexai whispered. "Your species was barely capable of orbital flight when we arrived." "Admiral," Chen replied, "you made the same mistake every bully makes. You assumed that because we weren't attacking anyone, we couldn't. But humans don't develop weapons to conquer other worlds. We develop them to defend our own. And we've been defending against imaginary alien invaders for so long that when real ones showed up, we were ready." Across the Earth's surface, more weapons systems came online. Particle beam arrays that had been disguised as radio telescopes began tracking the remaining hegemony vessels. Orbital defense platforms that had been hidden among space debris powered up their fusion reactors. Deep space monitoring stations revealed themselves to be heavily armed fortresses that had been waiting for exactly this scenario. Zexai realized with dawning horror that he had not discovered a primitive world ripe for conquest. He had stumbled into a trap that had been centuries in the making, sprung by a species that had spent its entire history learning how to fight enemies exactly like him. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. Chen's smile widened. "Terms, Admiral? I think you misunderstand the situation. You came here to conquer us. Instead, you've given us something humanity has never had before, a common enemy. Do you know what happens when humans stop fighting each other and start working together?" Another wave of kinetic penetrators rose from Earth's surface, but these weren't aimed at the hegemony ships. Instead, they streaked outward into deep space, carrying payloads that began broadcasting a message to every corner of the galaxy. "We're introducing ourselves to your neighbors," Chen explained. "Every species you've ever conquered is about to learn that the hegemony fleet can be defeated. That your technology isn't invincible. That resistance isn't futile after all." Zexai watched his life's work crumble as the message spread across the galactic communication networks. Rebellions that had been dormant for centuries would reawaken. Conquered worlds would remember what freedom tasted like. The hegemony's empire, built on the myth of their invincibility, would crumble as that myth died. "But that's not the worst part for you, Admiral," Chen continued. "The worst part is that you've made a fundamental error in judgment. You thought Earth would submit because we were divided and primitive. But you failed to understand something crucial about human nature." She paused, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of human conflict and cooperation. "We don't just fight for ourselves, Admiral. We fight for the idea that no one should have to kneel. And, now that we know there are others out there who need our help, we're coming for you." As if to emphasize her point, launch signatures began appearing across Earth's surface again. But these weren't weapons, they were ships. Human ships, built in secret over decades, powered by technologies that the hegemony had thought impossible for such a primitive species to develop. Admiral Zexai watched the first human fleet launch toward the stars and realized that the galaxy would never be the same. The age of the hegemony was ending, and the age of humanity was about to begin. The hunters had become the hunted, and Earth was no longer a world to be conquered, it was a world that would do the conquering. 6 months after the failed invasion of Earth, the galaxy was burning. Admiral Zexai sat in his detention cell aboard the human battleship Indomitable, watching through the reinforced viewport as another hegemony stronghold fell to the advancing human fleet. The irony wasn't lost on him, he was witnessing the collapse of his empire from the inside of a ship built by the very primitives he had once dismissed. The humans had kept their word. They had come for the hegemony, and they had brought friends. Enjoying the view? Zexai turned to see Commander Sarah Mitchell, the human officer assigned to oversee the high-value prisoners. She was young by human standards, but her eyes held the hardness that came from months of liberating worlds that had suffered under hegemony rule for centuries. "Your species has doomed the galaxy to chaos," Zexai said, his translator converting his bitterness into perfect English. "The hegemony brought order, stability, peace." Mitchell laughed, a sound that had no warmth in it. "Peace? Is that what you call the slave camps on Zirion Prime? The forced labor colonies on the Keth worlds? The compliance centers where you lobotomized entire populations?" She gestured toward the viewport, where human ships moved in perfect formation alongside vessels from dozens of other species, former hegemony subjects who had joined the Liberation Fleet after their worlds had been freed. "This isn't chaos, Admiral. This is justice." The battle for the hegemony fortress world of Dominion's Edge was already over, decided in the opening minutes when human kinetic penetrators had punched through defenses that had stood unconquered for 1,000 years. But the real victory wasn't military, it was what happened afterward. As Zexai watched, human transport ships descended toward the planet's surface. But, instead of occupying the world, they were evacuating hegemony civilians and relocating them to neutral worlds. The humans, it seemed, had no interest in becoming conquerors themselves. "I don't understand your species," Zexai admitted. "You have the power to rule the galaxy now. Why free our slaves instead of making them your own? Why relocate our populations instead of enslaving them? You could build an empire that would dwarf the hegemony." Mitchell sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "That's the difference between us, Admiral. You see power and think about how to use it to control others. We see power and think about how to use it to protect others." She pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked former hegemony territory, but instead of being replaced by human-controlled space, they were rapidly shifting to green, liberated worlds that had established their own governments. "Look at this," Mitchell said, pointing to a cluster of systems near the galactic rim. "The Zephyrian Collective just declared independence 3 days ago." 5 worlds that had been under hegemony rule for 8 centuries suddenly remembered what it meant to govern themselves. "Do you know what they did with their freedom?" Zexai remained silent. "They sent ships to help us liberate the next hegemony stronghold. Every species we free becomes part of the Liberation Fleet. Your empire isn't just falling, Admiral, it's being systematically dismantled by its own former victims." The holodisplay updated in real time, showing new green zones appearing as more worlds joined the growing coalition. The humans had sparked something that the hegemony had thought impossible, a galaxy-wide rebellion that was succeeding. "But the most beautiful part," Mitchell continued, "is that we're not the ones leading it anymore." She was right. What had started as a human-led liberation fleet had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, a true alliance of free worlds working together not for conquest, but for liberation. Human technology had given them the tools, but each species brought their own strengths to the fight. The ethereal voidlings provided intelligence networks that spanned dimensions. The aquatic depth dwellers had retrofitted their living ships with human weapons systems, creating vessels that could repair themselves while fighting. The crystalline shard singers had learned to weaponize their natural harmonics, turning their songs into weapons that could shatter hegemony shields from the inside. "The hegemony ruled through fear," Mitchell explained. "You convinced everyone that resistance was impossible, that unity was impossible, that freedom was impossible. But humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Well, Admiral, we've shown the galaxy that good people can do something. And, once that lesson is learned, it can never be unlearned." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Mitchell activated the communication system, and President Chen's image appeared in holographic form. "Commander Mitchell, we've received confirmation from the Andromedan Scout Fleet. The last hegemony stronghold in our galaxy has fallen. Admiral Vexkov has requested terms for surrender. Mitchell nodded. What are our terms, Madam President? The same as always. Complete dissolution of all hegemony governmental structures. Reparations to be paid to former slave worlds. War criminals to be tried by tribunals composed of their victims. And, most importantly, no more than one world per former hegemony species, with the rest distributed among the liberated populations. Zexai's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or despair. You're dismantling 3,000 years of civilization. No, Chen replied, having overheard his comment. We're dismantling 3,000 years of oppression. Civilization is what comes next. The communication ended, leaving Mitchell and Zexai alone again. Outside the viewport, human and allied ships were already preparing for the next phase of their mission, exploring beyond the galaxy's edge, searching for other hegemony territories that might exist in distant star clusters. What happens now? Zexai asked quietly. Now. Mitchell considered the question. Now you get to see what the galaxy looks like when everyone is free to determine their own destiny. Your people will be relocated to a suitable world where they can build a new society, one that doesn't depend on enslaving others. The worlds you conquered will decide their own futures. And humanity. She paused, watching a sleek human exploration vessel disappear into hyperspace, bound for the Magellanic Clouds. Humanity will do what we've always done. We'll explore. We'll learn. We'll help where we're needed. And we'll make sure that what the hegemony did never happens again. Zexai stared out at the stars, trying to comprehend a galaxy without the hegemony's guiding hand. Chaos, he repeated. It will be chaos. Maybe, Mitchell agreed. But it will be chosen chaos. Free chaos. And that makes all the difference. 6 months later, President Chen stood in the newly constructed Galactic Coordination Center on Luna, Earth's moon. Through the vast transparent walls, she could see ships from hundreds of worlds coming and going, traders, diplomats, explorers, and tourists from species that had never been allowed to travel freely under hegemony rule. The Vegan Republic has requested assistance with establishing democratic institutions, her chief of staff reported. The Crystalline Confederacy wants to share their harmonic technologies with the wider galaxy. And the former hegemony core worlds have collectively asked for human advisors to help them transition to self-governance. Chen nodded, reviewing the requests on her tablet. Each one represented a world taking its first steps toward freedom, and humanity had become the galaxy's unofficial midwife for newborn civilizations. What's the status of the exploration fleets? She asked. Admiral Torres reports that the expedition to the Andromeda Galaxy has made contact with 17 new species, none of which have any connection to the hegemony. Admiral Patel's fleet has discovered 3 more galaxies beyond our local group, all showing signs of advanced civilizations. And, most interesting of all, Admiral Kim's deep space reconnaissance has detected what appear to be artificial structures in the void between galaxies. Chen smiled. The galaxy that had once seemed so vast under hegemony control now felt small and comfortable. Humanity had found its place in the universe not as conquerors, but as liberators and explorers. A soft chime announced an incoming priority message. The holographic display activated, showing a young human officer standing on the bridge of an exploration vessel. President Chen, this is Captain Rodriguez aboard the Pioneer. We've made contact with a previously unknown species in the Triangulum Galaxy. They call themselves the Eternal Ascendancy, and they're exactly like the hegemony was. They've conquered most of their galaxy and are preparing to expand into ours. Chen's expression didn't change, but her chief of staff noticed her hands clenched slightly. How many ships do they have, Captain? Conservative estimate? 50,000 capital vessels, ma'am. Their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than the hegemony's was. They've already sent a message demanding our immediate surrender. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then she began to smile. It was the same expression Admiral Zexai had learned to fear, the look of a predator that had just spotted prey. Captain, please transmit the following message to the Eternal Ascendancy, she said. Inform them that their demand has been received and reviewed by the Galactic Liberation Alliance. Tell them that we appreciate their interest in our territory, but we're going to have to respectfully decline their generous offer of subjugation." She paused, her smile widening. "And, Captain? Send a copy of our message to every world in the Alliance. It seems the galaxy is about to get another lesson in why humanity doesn't kneel." As the communication ended, Chen turned back to the window overlooking Luna's bustling spaceport. Ships from hundreds of worlds were already beginning to depart, carrying word of the new threat to every corner of the galaxy. Within hours, the same species that had once cowered before the hegemony would be preparing to face an even greater enemy. But, this time, they wouldn't be facing it alone. This time, they had humanity fighting beside them. And, this time, they knew something that no conquered species had ever known before, that resistance wasn't futile, that unity was possible, and that freedom was always worth fighting for. The Eternal Ascendancy thought the galaxy would submit, just as the hegemony had thought Earth would submit. They were about to discover that some lessons only need to be taught once, but, once taught, they echo across the stars forever. The age of galactic empires was ending. The age of galactic freedom had begun. And humanity, the species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight tyranny, was just getting started.